Welcome back to part two of this Sparking Interest podcast with Kevin Underwood from the British Woodworking Federation and our own Niall Rowan from the ASFP. In part one, we discussed some of the issues or challenges surrounding the proposal of the removal of BS 476 from ADB, and we also talked about competency, which of course is one of the things that we're all talking about at the moment. So because of the depth and breadth of conversation, we felt it appropriate for your ease of viewing to break this down into a couple of parts. So this is the beginning of part two. So Kevin, welcome. Niall, welcome back to part two. Let's continue the conversation. I think the design responsibility debate has been pushing up and down the supply chain for a while, and even during my time working in as a manufacturer, working for a specialist manufacturing installer, we had a number of, as a business, that business had a number of challenges, to the point that I think we ended up putting a disclaimer in the orders that said something along the lines of that the company's design responsibility is limited to the mechanical and electrical interfacing of the product with the building structure. Because of course the definition of design responsibility is somewhat confusing, in the sense that if you move a bolt 300 mil to the left, you've effectively changed the design, and that person moving the bolt may not be indemnified for making that decision. We know that there's architects that, because they cannot evidence competency within some of the more specialist areas of passive, that they can't get they can't be underwritten for that work, and therefore can't do the work. So on page 17 of the design, there's a bit of a blank space in the middle of the page that says passive fire protection here, as it cascades down to the awarded tier 1 contractor, who then turns to page 17 and sees a big empty space that says passive fire protection here, and then they're effectively adopting that design responsibility in terms of how they're trying to do it. They then in turn try and push it on to the specialist subbies, who may not have the commercial acumen or backing to be able to afford the indemnification, the insurance to allow them to adopt that design responsibility. And I think that's something that possibly Gateway 2 and 3 will maybe solidify more, and create greater boundaries and definitions of who is responsible and when and what for, because that's something that has been kicked around like an old can for quite a long time now. Any thoughts on that? Oh, Niall, any thoughts on that?
No, not really. The only thing I'll say is, and also the manufacturers get involved as well, but the manufacturers will back up what they've had tested, assessed, and exapt and classified. But when people start doing other things with it, or manufacturers are asked to come up with a solution that's not covered by their testing and certification for an end-use application, who's responsible? Is it the manufacturer because they come up with a solution, even though they say we can't back this up? Or is it the designer who's asked them to come up with a solution and said, no, I want it to fit in this way? It's really difficult.
Yeah. And I think a bit, Kevin, you'll probably appreciate this. This goes back to that slight, that falls into the arena slightly of that door assemblies, is that within our industry, we represent effectively two areas. We represent the products, so a finished thing, so a finished damper, a finished curtain, door, a set, and that's been tested, and the test results have been produced, whether that's to a 476 or whether it's to 1634, etc. And that gets interfaced into the building. We then deal with products, that's tubes of mastic, batten board, things that you bring together to create the solution. And that's the area we're seeing the biggest amount of pressure at the moment, because quite often the configuration of these products to give a solution in something that is can be quite often a unique environment, in terms of the opening, in terms of the penetrations, in terms of the separation of the penetrations, types of penetrations, one cable tray, 3 pipes, this, that, the other. That's where we're seeing the issues being created, because of course, once that configuration has been installed using products to give a solution, there's then no evidence or evidenceable tests for that particular scenario. And that's where the tier ones are getting a bit of a problem, which we're at the moment trying to support them on, because no one ever tested, the proliferation. There's a thing if you work in distribution, there's a SKU, a single countable unit. That's a left-hand front indicator for a Mark V Cortina. Another SKU is a right-hand front indicator for a Mark V Cortina, both in yellow. If you want a clear indicator lens, that doubles the proliferation to 4, and so on and so on. And what we're seeing is the proliferation of these variations of what they're trying to resolve is so broad and so deep. No manufacturer would ever test the entire proliferation because it's almost infinite.
One of the biggest issues is shaft walls.
Yeah,
the lack of test evidence or penetration systems in shaft walls.
And is that something you've seen in the fire door industry, Kevin? Have you seen that? Is that sort of where there's not necessarily what's been brought together retrospectively? They're then having to try and get a ticket on it effectively.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah,
we whether it's brought to my attention, we obviously advocate third-party product certification and working within the scope of the assessments. People that are certified can get extensions to the scope of their certification. They can get supplements to it. It's also possible to get a site-specific assessment where, well, I'm not sure actually now that would be done, but in the past there can be site-specific assessments. But I would steer clear of a manufacturer doing an ad hoc review of something that's outside the scope of their certified performance. If you've just got test reports, you have direct application of the test evidence. You can't change from what was tested. This is why there'll be some people in the fire door sector that have test evidence and may use that evidence, but supply products that are not within the direct application of the test evidence. That's not my common understanding, but I would think that might happen. When we link to assessments, then we would advocate those are done either through EXAPS or following the Passive Fire Protection Forum guide to undertaking assessments, and that those people doing the assessments are competent to do that. I would discourage manufacturers to do their own desktop assessment and sort of give it it'll be all right. Don't take that chance. Get somebody who knows the product. Manufacturers would say, but I know my product better than a third-party assessor. Well, you might, but you don't know about every other product of that type that has gone through the test house and the certification body, of which someone who's doing assessments for all manufacturers would have a broader understanding of how products perform. So they're more knowledgeable. They can bring other experience into play that the single manufacturer might not. So if a manufacturer does an ad hoc assessment, it's not backed up by a third party, it would be outside the scope of their product certification. Through the Fire Door Alliance, we actually say that you shouldn't be producing product that isn't covered by the certification, because by association, if you are known to be a company with product certification and you place a product on the market, the association would be, well, that's going to be certified as well, but it might not be. So there's issues around that. It's certainly produce your test evidence. If you've only got a test report, you've got to stick within the direct application of that test report. If you want to go further than that, you need an assessment report or an EXAPS report linked to it. You may need more than one test, but get the assessments written by people who are authorized to do it. Look at 15725, so that at least the structure of the assessments, according to approved document B, has to be written follow the principles of 15725. Now, that may start to be problematic because, as Niall would know, 15725 has just eliminated the use of expert opinion, which it used to say you could use expert opinion if you weren't conformity marking, but we'll have to tackle with that issue now. But I would discourage.
Opinion has disappeared, hasn't it? But yeah, I think it's. You mentioned actually the Fire Sector Federation document.
No, Passive Fire Protection Forum.
Sorry, PFP. Sorry, beg your pardon.
Yeah, I mean,
too many
PFP
acronyms,
comes under
Kevin.
the FSF now. Yeah.
Too many acronyms. So the FSF document is something that actually isn't. It's not a British standard. It sits within the Fire Sector Federation as a guide, as a best practice guide. Is that probably the best way to?
Yeah, and it's called up in approved document B.
It is called up, which is quite a rarity for something that is not such a formal, I suppose, document.
It happened because we asked the dealer to do it, because we said you need to have a formalised code of practice for assessments, and this is what it's the industry standard.
So my question is, and this is me. I'm sort of using my pass card here to ask this question: should that document that currently sits within the Fire Sector Federation be moved, nominated into a pass and then a BS? Should it be given? Should it be created to be a more robust standard? Kevin,
I think it'd be good if it did, but it's if you want to sponsor a PAS, who's going to fund the PAS? We could try. Where would it sit? Would it sit with FSH 22 generally?
It would sit within FSH 22. That would be the place to do it in terms technically. But the thing is, so you said you need to sponsor it somehow, whether it's a PAS or whether it's a British standard or whatever. We've approached DLUC and HSE and said you need to do exactly this process, and we're in discussion. Well, we've had a discussion with them. They're still making their mind up. But I think there will be movement on this because it's all tied in with the 476 issue. If we get rid of 476 completely and just go down the classification route and everything's rigid and you can only test what you only sell what you've tested or how classified, then there's kind of no need for assessments. But we know that's not going to happen. And just to pick up on something earlier you said, Kevin, about independence of assessment, I get that completely. But talking to one of our major contractor members a few years ago, he says on a big site there'll be 5 or 6 or 7 engineering judgment made every day on site by my staff because it has to be done, otherwise the site will grind to a halt, because what is there in front of them isn't what's on the bits of paper that support them. Now you can argue that's wrong, and I would, but this is what oils the wheels of construction.
Well, were we expecting to see BIM put an end to that? So you had the digital twin of the building and everything. All those issues were ironed out before it actually came to construction.
Yeah. I can't see that, but also, I think there'll be a question on BIM shortly. But we still have what we call the format wars. I call them the format wars. The VHS, Betamax, Video 2000. While we have all these competing models for BIM, and that feeds into golden thread, and if there's no interoperability, then it's dead in the water, and that goes for golden thread as well. Has to be interoperability of systems so that people can feed into the golden thread. Sorry, I'm answering part of it.
No. I think it was just
just picking up on the golden thread. So it's the building, and I'll read it. The Building Higher Risk Building Procedures England Regulations 2023 give us, I believe, it's the first time that the golden thread is written into a statutory instrument. And in there, it says that the golden thread will be retained within an electrical facility. So that's completely open-ended, isn't it? It's still it's any It's got to be digital, confirms that, but it's held by the client, at least in that SI, as an electrical facility, and then it goes on to tell us about the security and the ability to have documented changes, etc., etc. So it's not, golden thread is open-ended, isn't it? It can be anything. There isn't anything mandated, because it's just that open-ended.
Know what needs to go in the golden thread. It's all the things that make up a building and all the decisions, and not just those in relation to fire safety or structural safety. I think the issue is nobody quite knows how to do it or what it looks like. It would be nice to see a golden thread produced by somebody as a model or a template. And I guess all these software companies and some of our members of those are busy developing these things. But I'm a bit worried that it might be a bit chaotic. Let's put it that way.
Well, the information is so we see at the early stages it's going to be the responsibility of the client, and I expect at occupation phase we'll see the legislation say that's transferred to the accountable person.
Yeah, I agree, because the client, I mean, the client could be an investment company. What are they going to know about the golden thread? The Building Safety Act puts a lot of onus and responsibility on the client. I worry that they're up to the job, frankly.
Well,
possibly. I think somebody made the comment at the event this week that building owners will also have to demonstrate competency, otherwise they can't own the building. And that does sort of bring a slight different take on it, I suppose, because actually what that does, as much as it sort of sounds funny as a concept, what it does demonstrate is the fact that the golden thread has to go all the way through, from design, from concept to design, the practicalities of that design in terms of the respective architectural technicians and engineers, all the way through procurement. And I think procurement's an interesting one. And you've mentioned a couple of times, Kevin, the distribution part of the fire door industry. And one of our concerns has been is that your young 18-year-old counter staff person at a builder's merchants all of a sudden enters the arena of design responsibility, because they say don't use this. I know you want this product, but use this one. It's £3 cheaper, and inadvertently enters the world of DR.
But that would be controlled by a competence level.
Of course, yes, absolutely. So, that's why we recognise it.
At the lowest level of the counter staff, if a customer came in and said, I want widget A, they would turn around and get widget A and then hand over widget A. If the customer came in and said, I want a widget that does this, and they have at the builder's merchants widgets A, B, and C, then there's a higher level of competency to understand, to hand over the most appropriate of those widgets to the client to meet their needs. So we go back to competency, and the decision of the counter staff would be, am I competent? They should know by their training and understanding that they cannot make that change or make that recommendation to the customer and say, sorry, I can't tell you what you need, but when Dave's free, Dave has got the experience, the training, the skills, etc., to help the customer, then I will ask Dave to help you with that decision. So they need to know the limitations of what they can and can't do.
It's interesting that one of the things I introduced in the ASFP when I was CEO is membership requirements, and we introduced membership requirements on distributors that staff giving advice had to have certain levels of passive fire protection knowledge for precisely what you've just described. But of course, not all distributors are members of the ASFP, but there we are.
No, but they should be, I suppose. As much as they probably should be. If they sell doors, they should probably be members of the BWF as well. Because, of course, if they're members of these organisations, they get a far greater insight and knowledge into the industries they represent. You mentioned about limitations. Actually, there's a very notable lady that we've done a couple of podcasts with in support of women in passive, and that's a lady called Andrea White that is an IFE member, ex fire and rescue, and I think is now runs her own consultancy, and she runs Women Talking Fire. And she mentioned in one of the podcasts we did with her last year that know your limitations have been removed. I'm not quite sure whether she didn't, when she said that, she didn't mean it had been deliberately removed for, sort of, evil purposes, but it had sort of fallen out of fashion or fallen out of vocabulary when aligned to the SCEB acronym, which, skills, knowledge, experience, behaviours, and know your limitations. And I think it's the limitations part that has been missing significantly because of a cultural shift where you're trying to minimise the number of sublets you make on a job. Therefore, if subby A if he can do job 1 and 2, can he do 3? And while he's doing 3, he may as well do 4 and 5. And by the time he's got into job 4 and 5, he's gone beyond his limitations. But he's doing it anyway.
But doesn't that fall under behaviour? That's where the behaviour
element comes. Yeah, it does. Yes, it does. It falls under behaviour, but it's missing as a and it wasn't a revelation to me, but Andrea sort of pressed the point that it's not something that we refer to as much as we did or much as we should, because nobody wants to profess their limitations. Because if you're a provider of products and services in the construction industry, you're trying to maximize the value of your business, and therefore, why would you sort of ring fence yourself into an area that anything outside of that is your limitation. I'm talking very generally in that sense, but it was interesting you've mentioned that sort of phrase, limitations, because it's something that a couple of people have mentioned on a couple of the podcasts.
But in the Working Group 12 report, we've broken down the functions into 5 levels, and we based it on Bloom's taxonomy. And we do expect people to know their limitations. So from, as we said, the basic level on counter staff, where they can only provide the product that was asked for, up to the people that a higher level who are writing the rules for that organization of what can and can't be done, or being referred to for their competency, their skills, knowledge, experience, and behavior in relating to higher level questions that are being asked. It may be that they get to the stage where one of the examples we've used is like a waste system, sewerage system, or piping coming from a building, and you can buy individual components, tubes, pipes. That's very simple. I want that pipe. You then get up to, you have to design systems with connections and flow and capacities and volumes and things that suit the building, and that can be done by the same organization, but it starts to have that extra factor built in. They are using their skills and knowledge to design a system that works for that building. So you're looking at these tiers of competency. As you make the problem more complex, the level of competency has to be higher. And I think we do get across that they have, you know where the boundaries are, you know where the limitations are. So don't, with the level of training, your skills, your experience, have the appropriate behavior to say, I can't do that. I think one of the, soon after Grenfell, I was contacted by, I think it was MHCLG at the time. I don't think it had become DLUC at that time, to look into an instance around a fire door installation in a hospital. And what appeared to have happened is that the contractor was there's a series of fire door sets that have been delivered. There's a building with a series of holes in it. We're off for the weekend. When we come back on Monday morning, we want all those holes filled with all those fire doors. So we'll see you on Monday. And when they came back, the result wasn't that good. And then the queries was, well, what's gone wrong here? And it was that really the installer should have started his work on Saturday morning or whatever it was, and offered up the door and found this aperture's far too big. And then had the experience and been backed up by the contractor. They say, look, I can't do this work. These door sets don't fit those holes. They're too big. I'm going to have to make good too much. And I don't know whether that making good is going to be properly fire stopping, etc., etc. But they carried on. So it was that lack of confidence to say, this is wrong. I can't carry on. I'm going to have to stop work and not do it. You know, it's then progressing on. So knowing where the limitations are, where the limits of your capabilities are, and having the experience or the behavioral skills to say, I'm just not going to do it, is important in that, because you know there could be situations we discussed on some where it's saying this part doesn't properly fit into that hole. So just leave it for the time being, because something else needs to happen before that's going to be done correctly.
And the problem with that is they won't get paid.
Well,
I mean, being cynical about it. So
no, true, but you know, that's another factor that, you know, you can't. They've got to be confident that it won't be punished to doing the right thing.
Why haven't you done it?
Yeah, indeed. And because of course LADs start kicking in and all sorts of things, you know, from a contractual point of view. So I think we've covered my page of questions on the big issues of at the moment. You mentioned BIM, and I thought, oh blimey, we've just added another hour to this podcast. So maybe we come back and talk about that later. So the UKCA is going to, you know, is clearly dragging on as the period has been extended, and you know we're now being told that construction products are exempt from you know remaining common, I suppose. And I'm sure there's other things that will throw itself up over the next few months. So it's probably worth revisiting this at some point next year to see where we all got to. The door industry is you know is a significant part of fire safety. I don't know. Have you got a number in your head? How many fire doors on average get fitted in the UK in a year, Kevin? It's not a trick question. Just give us a number.
Through the Fire Door Alliance, we're just, I must admit, we're seeing a little bit of a turn down at the moment, but consistently our members just through the FDA are putting around 2 million fire doors into the market. Now, we can't believe that we're a lot of the market. And we have worked with OPSS because they were doing a survey, I think 18 months ago, to try and determine the size of the fire door market. And they came up with a figure which had to be far too low. So we're just the Fire Door Alliance. We work with a number of certification bodies, placing product on the market. We know because we provide a traceability label with each product. Sometimes they take two, so we allowing the mathematics, we know there's around 2 million fire doors that go through the Fire Door Alliance members. Now, there are other certification schemes. There are other organizations with their manufacturers putting it on the market. There are people that unknowing, they make a fire door, they've never tested it, they've never had it assessed, but they believe that they've made a fire door. Genuinely, they shouldn't be doing it, of course, but there's this Rumsfeldian situation, you know, the unknown unknowns. If they didn't know that they needed to test a fire door, but they had an idea of what you needed to do to make a fire door, then it would go on the market. So there's those people. There's the imports. There's the people producing fire doors from purchased blanks, again, just effectively knocking them up. We are looking at, let's say it's 5 million plus. There's so many routes to market for fire doors. We can only see the bit that comes through us. So we know we do about 2 million.
So, and of course, the media like to use this datum, don't they, for sort of big things like icebergs, sort of, peeling off, and it's always the size of Wales, apparently. So to put that into context, there's 1 million people that live in Birmingham. So effectively, twice the number of people that live in Birmingham in terms of doors get put into the market that you're aware of from your end, and possibly even 5 times the population of Birmingham. That's an awful lot of doors, Kevin, and a significant market, I'm sure, for your members and the industry as a whole.
What area I have concern about this, I keep people who've spoken to me before would know I talk about fire doors and notification to building control. So if someone installed a front door, will change the windows, they're a control fitting under the building regulations, and their installation, whether it's in under new build, it would cover under the building control for the property, but for replacements they have to be notified to building control. Now, if you're changing an internal fire door, then I would expect that that's very rarely notified to building control. We see incidences where people change their flat entrance doors, now these probably balcony access flat entrance doors, with ordinary PVCU door sets.
Yes.
The people, they don't know. First of all, the contractor providing that door set should know that should be a fire door, but maybe they don't. They've just put in a replacement door. It could be enemy. I'm not knocking PVC. It's just PVC tends not to have fire characteristics.
No.
So it's unlikely to be a fire door. But if it had needed to be notified to building control, it should have been as it was an external door, but we go on. I use look at the concept of the material alteration under the building regulations. So if an alteration to a building is material to the fire safety of the building, then that change should be notified to building control. So I would say if you're changing a fire door, then that is material to the fire safety of the building. So you should notify building control. This concept of material, is it going to be significant, let's say, to the fire safety? But if it's a flat entrance door, if it's a door to a stairwell, there's lots of areas where you think if that door failed, if that was installed and it wasn't a fire door, that would be material to the fire safety. So I would say all fire door installations should be notified to building control.
But that would be under the Building Safety Act. One of the things is one of the notifiable changes. Anything that changes the performance, fire performance of the building has to be notified. But just going back to your earlier point, when you think about your motor car that you drive, it's so traceable. If the manufacturer finds a fault, then they write a letter via DVLA, they know where you will live, and you get a recall and it's fixed or whatever happens. Well, that kind of doesn't happen in many cases for construction. A lot of fire stopping products, it doesn't go to specialist members like us, like our members, but sometimes it just goes into general builders merchant, and it just disappears, and nobody knows where it goes. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. Or when we get control of the building, we will have the fire safety information via the golden thread, and we know we bought this collar from Screwfix or whatever. I mean, I've just used that as an example. But that is quite right. So your conversation, your statement about the doors, it's exactly the same thing. Where are these things coming and where are they going? We don't know. And people say to manufacturers, "Why don't you know?" I said, "Well, because people want to buy them, and we don't have control." Mike's going to make a comment about fire curtains now, I suspect, and how.
No, I'm trying to stay hugely impartial on this particular call, because I think that's I'm interested to understand where all of this is going to go, and I think we've got a relatively good sort of steer on it. And I'm sure the BWF, and as ASFP is doing, is a lot of this is to do with how we support our membership through this transition. Because my first question to Chandru from Dealup when he came in to this particular podcast a few months ago was that your average SME business has got so many more things to deal with now, including the cost of living crisis. I know the media like to frame things, in a way that causes absolute panic. I think the recent one of global warming to global boiling was exceptional in terms of trying to get a response. But they have so many things to deal with in terms of their day-to-day business. Inflation, cost of living. The Brexit is still certainly not unfinished in any sense. It took us 50 years to get to the point of leaving the common market. It'll take us 50 years to unravel from where we left the common market, I'm sure, probably in one respect or another. But in terms of that, what are your, if there was two major things that the BWF is focusing on member support, what would those be? What are the two big things that I suppose BWF is focusing on for its membership at the moment?
Well, I'm trying to unpick the legislation around the Building Safety Act. I'm just dotting I's and crossing T's on my September technical update, which is, it's got elements on competency, but it is then focused on the August 17th release of the statutory instruments related to the Building Safety Act. And its technical updates tend to be very heavily focused on fire safety recently, because that's where a lot of the activity is. And I look for other areas of activity where we can be more informative. Recently, an area which is coming of interest once more is on environmental credentials of products, EPD and so on. We did a lot of activity about 5 years ago around EPD. That was of initial interest and then waned off, as been in the doldrums for a bit of time, and now is coming to the fore once more, as it is interest in end of life scenarios for timber products. So alongside, fire safety still remains dominant. Environmental is likely to show its face again. It's still not significant, despite the fact that we have something with sort of a good green history in working with wood. But until it's a bit like BIM, Niall. BIM was very much of interest, but really from members in relation to BIM, I get about one call a year in what should we be doing here. It just hasn't significantly impacted our industry. Environmental products would be likely coming through. A lot of the focus seems to just be taken up. I don't want to belittle it, with the Building Safety Act, and now we've been waiting for these SIs to come through, where we actually see the guts of the Building Safety Act and what it means, and this is going to be having an effect. We haven't yet touched on the Morel Day report, which of course we've got to see what the impact of that is going to be. And I must admit, in April, I was delighted to see that drop on my desk and read it through with interest. And it was one of those where you read it, you thought, that's someone who's thinks the same way I do. And it was refreshing to get that fresh pair of eyes looking at our industry and the problems and challenges that we were facing.
It's thank you for mentioning that, because said Mr. Morel is coming in to do an ASFP podcast to talk about said Morel Day report. Which we are doing in a few weeks' time. We finally managed. He's a man post issue of report. You can imagine his diary filled up very quickly. So we've managed to find a day that suits everybody, and he's going to come in and talk us around the report.
We understand that the government aren't intending to issue a response to Paul Morel's report, which Niall looks like he's bursting to say something.
Well, if the event we held on Wednesday, I spoke about the Morel report, kind of thoughts on the Morel report, and that was followed by Chandru, who I thought he's going to demolish everything I say, but in fact he didn't let on what they were going to do, but they will be soon. I don't think they're going to publish a response to it. I think they're going to put out proposals, probably for consultation, but certainly. I don't think they're not going to issue. Sometimes they issue a response document to a consultation, and then they go away again, and then they go and do something. But I think they are thinking about it very strongly. We're all waiting for it. Morel introduces a lot of things. It's very, very thorough. For somebody with a testing and certification background like myself, a lot of it was, well, I know all this already, because with the issues that we live and breathe with all the time. And he puts quite strength in, he wants to go for the highest level of what we call attestation of conformity, which I would be surprised if the government adopt, but they might do. It's fine. But I think if anybody's got third-party certificated product certification, they're well on the way to satisfying the government's requirements, whether it's via third-party certification or safety critical, I mentioned earlier. You're doing that, then you're well on the way. It won't be a radical change. If you're not doing any of that, then you really are going to see some big changes.
Yes, the report says that they can't see why we are persisting with conformity marking, because it was written under the CPR that wasn't meant to be a quality standard or a safety standard. It was a passport for trading across the single market of the EU, and we're no longer in the single market of the EU, so its purpose is now not relevant to what we do. There are a lot there that, yes, we said that third-party product certification was good, and that's, we go back to the start of this conversation, and we're on third-party product certification. But Fire Alliance has been campaigning for that to be written into the building regulations as a requirement for. We started in 1997, so what are we in our 26th year of trying to?
Same with the ASFP, we've always pushed third-party certification, and I think for product certification, it's a lot stronger than, say, for installer certification.
It's interesting that the ISO standards for third-party product certification 17065 and 67 are designated standards. So I wondered whether there was an intent to use those standards for regulating products at some point, or whether they were already being used for regulating products.
That's interesting. I suspect that might give us a clue.
Yeah.
So I think we can come back. I think it'd be good to come back next year and have another chat, Kevin. I think one of the areas moving away from fire doors, but probably represented just as much by BWF, is the rise in timber construction. I saw one of the news posts recently that Aviva Insurance had, I think, created a policy that will support the underwriting of timber framed construction. We see the ever-growing rise of modular and volumetric manufacture and assembly, predominantly, using timber in quite a lot of its work. And I'm sure you'll have views and things to talk about on that. So it would be great for you to come back and sort of delve more into the world of timber within construction. It's other than stone, it's probably the second oldest construction material that man has used to improve his environment. So there's it's always been around, and it's probably never going to go away. And of course it's sustainable, because you can keep growing more of it as you go. So
yes, well, it's sustainable if the forest management is done correctly.
Of course. You see, and that's where you have your greater knowledge of timber means that you can frame it in that final statement far better than I can. What I would say is first of all, Kevin, thank you for giving up your time. We've been chatting for a good time now, but we do appreciate your time and giving up your time to talk to us. I hope it wasn't too painful, and I apologise for the fact that we can't give you nice biscuits, but hopefully you can come and see us next time and partake in those. So thank you for being open and honest and frank and forthright in the conversation. It always makes for a better chat. Niall, thank you for your contribution as always. I'm always amazed at Niall's depth and breadth of knowledge, and it's always good to see Niall in public, because you always generally find there's a few of Niall's disciples that follow him around whenever he appears at an event somewhere. So long may that continue. So all I'll say is to both of you, thank you very much for discussing this. I'm sure this podcast will raise some questions. If there's any questions, Kevin, that relates to that are directed to you, we'll forward them on, and you can reply to them at your leisure.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will enlighten some of the viewers even more. So again, thanks very much for attending and taking part in the Sparking Interest podcast with ASP on fire doors predominantly, but we ventured into other areas, so thanks for that as well. Thank you, and we'll say goodbye to everybody watching this until next time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.